Imagine a wild animal is trapped, exhausted, and completely unable to escape. When a human appears, the animal sees strange hands reaching toward it, and for a few terrifying seconds, everything looks like an attack. Every instinct in its body tells it to fight, flee, or freeze. But then, something unexpected happens. The trap comes off, the pain disappears, and suddenly, the animal is free. It runs into the wilderness, while the human watches it disappear between the trees. That is usually where we think the story ends. The animal is safe, the rescuer has done their job, and everyone walks away. But what if the story does not really end there? What did that animal actually learn from the experience? Did it learn that humans are dangerous? Did it learn that humans can sometimes be trusted? Did it recognize that this particular human was trying to help? Or did none of that happen at all, leaving the animal with nothing more than a powerful memory of fear, pain, and sudden freedom? When we look at what scientists have discovered about animal memory, social intelligence, individual recognition, learning, and the way different species respond to the behavior of other creatures, that simple explanation becomes a lot harder to defend. The more we learn about wild animals, the more we have to wonder, when a human saves an animal's life, does the animal actually know it was helped? To understand this, we first have to discard a very human assumption. We tend to divide the world into two categories: humans who understand things and animals that merely react. We assume humans remember experiences, make decisions, recognize intentions, and form relationships, while animals simply follow instincts, running when something moves, eating when something smells like food, and escaping when something looks dangerous. But nature is not nearly that simple. Wild animals spend their entire lives making decisions that can determine whether they survive another day. They decide when to run and when to stay still. They remember where food can be found and where danger appeared before. They recognize members of their own species, distinguish familiar individuals from strangers, and learn which locations are safe and which ones are not. Some animals cooperate, compete, deceive, share resources, protect one another, and change their behavior depending on what another individual is doing. A predator does not simply chase every moving creature it sees. A prey animal does not simply run from every sound. Survival requires information, memory, judgment, and the ability to learn from previous experiences. The interesting question, therefore, is not whether animals can think. We already know that many animals can learn and remember in surprisingly sophisticated ways. The much harder question is whether an animal can understand something about another creature's intention. And that is where the idea of human help becomes fascinating. Help is not a physical object you can see, smell, or measure directly. It is an interpretation of behavior. One individual performs an action that improves another individual's situation, and the second individual somehow has to recognize what happened. Humans do this constantly. If someone sees you struggling with a heavy box and picks it up, you understand the reason behind their movement. You do not simply observe that the box changed position. You understand that another person saw your difficulty and intentionally acted to reduce it. But would a wild animal understand the same thing? Imagine a young bird caught in a piece of plastic, struggling harder and harder as the material tightens around its body. Its breathing becomes difficult, its movements become frantic, and every attempt to escape makes the situation worse. Then an enormous human approaches. From the bird's perspective, this is initially terrifying. Strange hands move toward its body. It cannot understand the human's language, and there is no obvious reason to believe the creature approaching it is safe. Yet the plastic is removed, the bird is released, the human steps away, and the bird flies. Several explanations exist for what happened inside the bird's mind. It may have learned nothing beyond the end of the struggle. It may have associated the entire encounter with extreme fear. It may have learned that the human's presence was followed by the disappearance of the painful object. It may have remembered the person's appearance or movement. It may simply have associated the location with danger. We cannot look inside its brain and find a sentence saying, "That person helped me." That is precisely what makes the question so difficult. This is why we need to be careful with online rescue stories that present an animal's thoughts as obvious. A deer looks back at a rescuer, and a caption claims, "He knew she saved him." A bird returns to a person's window, and suddenly the story becomes, "It came back to thank her." A wild animal allows someone to approach it, and people immediately describe the animal as expressing gratitude. These stories can be emotionally powerful, but emotion is not evidence. A behavior can be completely real while our interpretation of that behavior is completely wrong. An animal looking at a human does not automatically mean affection. Staying still does not necessarily mean trust. Returning to a location does not necessarily mean gratitude. Even approaching a person does not automatically mean the animal has formed a human-like bond. There may be several explanations for the same behavior, and strangely enough, this makes the reality even more interesting. Once we remove the emotional storytelling, we are left with a deeper scientific question. What exactly can an animal learn about a human? Consider crows, which are among the most fascinating animals when it comes to recognizing individual humans. Research has shown that crows can distinguish individual human faces and remember people associated with threatening experiences. That means they do not necessarily treat every human being as interchangeable. A particular human can become a specific piece of information in a crow's world. Imagine a crow repeatedly seeing you in the same park. Perhaps you walk past without bothering it. Perhaps another person once chased it away. Perhaps someone else regularly leaves food nearby. Over time, the crow can collect information about these individual humans and adjust its behavior accordingly. It may decide that one person is dangerous while another is relatively harmless. Now imagine that a crow becomes trapped and a human frees it. Does the crow understand the abstract concept of rescue? We cannot confidently say that it does, but its ability to learn and remember individual humans makes it biologically plausible that the encounter becomes part of its future assessment of that person. Crucially, this assessment does not require a human-like thought such as, "This is a good person who saved my life." It could be something much simpler. This particular individual approached me but did not cause harm. After this individual interacted with me, the thing trapping me disappeared. That distinction matters. Intelligence does not have to look like human intelligence to be meaningful. This brings us to a vital distinction. Recognition is not the same thing as gratitude. An animal can recognize you without being grateful. It can remember you without loving you. It can trust you without understanding your moral intentions. It can realize that your actions benefited it without experiencing gratitude in the human sense. When people ask, "Does the animal know I helped it?" they are actually combining several different questions into one. Does it know who I am? Does it remember what I did? Does it understand that my action caused the positive outcome? Does it recognize that I intended to help? Does it feel a particular emotion because of that experience? And does it change its future behavior because of what happened? These are very different questions. The first few can potentially be investigated through experiments involving learning, memory, recognition, and behavioral choices. The deeper questions about subjective experience are much harder. Since we cannot ask the animal directly, researchers have to look for behavioral evidence. Do animals prefer individuals who behave positively? Do they remember helpful or harmful individuals? Do they change their behavior after watching another individual interact with someone? Do they distinguish between people based on previous experiences? These kinds of questions can reveal surprisingly sophisticated social perception. Certain social animals appear especially capable of evaluating other individuals. Primates, for example, live in environments where understanding social relationships can be a matter of survival. A monkey does not need to speak human language to notice whether another individual is aggressive, calm, dominant, cooperative, or threatening. It can observe facial expressions, body movements, proximity, vocalizations, and the consequences of previous encounters. These same systems can sometimes be applied to humans. An animal may not understand our moral concepts, but it can observe what we do. It can learn that one person approaches slowly while another moves aggressively. It can learn that one person brings food while another tries to chase it away. It can learn that a particular sound predicts something unpleasant. In other words, animals may not need a philosophical understanding of kindness to recognize useful patterns in our behavior. Dolphins offer another remarkable example. Living in complex social groups where cooperation and communication are extremely important, dolphins possess sophisticated ways of responding to other individuals. There are documented accounts of injured or entangled dolphins approaching human divers while carrying fishing hooks, lines, or other objects that are causing them pain. In some cases, the human manipulates the painful object while the dolphin remains nearby rather than immediately fleeing. These encounters are extraordinary, but we should resist the temptation to translate them directly into human language. We cannot simply say that the dolphin thought, "This human understands my problem and is going to save me." There are many possible explanations. The dolphin may recognize that the diver is not behaving aggressively. It may notice that the diver is targeting the object rather than attacking attacking its body. It may have previous experience with divers. It may tolerate the interaction because the pain is so severe that escaping is less important than removing the source of that pain. Or it may possess a more sophisticated understanding of the situation than we currently know how to measure. The important point is that its behavior cannot be dismissed by a simple instinctual rule like see human, run. Something more flexible is happening. And this flexibility is extremely important because wild animals live in unpredictable environments. A rigid set of instincts would not be enough to handle every situation. Imagine an animal encountering a completely unfamiliar object for the first time. It has no genetic instructions saying exactly what this particular object means. Instead, it has to investigate, observe, remember, and update its expectations. This is one of the fundamental advantages of learning. An animal does not need to know everything in advance if it can learn quickly from experience. If a particular sound repeatedly predicts danger, the animal becomes more cautious around that sound. If a particular location repeatedly provides food, it may return there. If approaching a certain human repeatedly leads to food or safety, the animal may become less fearful. Likewise, if a human repeatedly causes danger, the animal may become increasingly wary. From the animal's perspective, survival is essentially a constant process of prediction. This is also why wildlife rescuers know that animals often fail to cooperate during emergencies. An injured or frightened animal may bite, scratch, kick, struggle violently, or attack the very person trying to save it. At first glance, this might seem to prove that the animal does not understand help, but that conclusion would be far too simple. Imagine being trapped, injured, unable to escape, and suddenly confronted by a creature many times your size. Even if that creature is trying to improve your situation, your nervous system may still be screaming at you to escape. Fear can overpower everything else. The animal's immediate priority is survival, not philosophical analysis. Its body is responding to danger as quickly as possible. An animal may therefore fight against a rescuer and still benefit from the rescue. It may even learn from the experience later, after the immediate threat has passed. The same principle applies to stillness. People sometimes see a rescued animal become motionless and interpret it as calmness or gratitude. But stillness can mean many things. The animal may be exhausted. It may be overwhelmed by stress. It may be frozen by fear. It may be physically incapable of escaping. A prey animal that suddenly stops moving is not necessarily thinking, I trust this human. It may simply be experiencing a powerful biological response to an overwhelming situation. This is why repeated long-term behavior is generally more informative than a single dramatic moment. If an animal recognizes a familiar caretaker weeks later, behaves calmly around that individual while avoiding strangers, or repeatedly chooses to remain near someone who has treated it safely, those patterns provide much stronger evidence of learning than one emotional-looking encounter. Ultimately, animals learn through prediction and association. A human approaching may originally predict danger, but after repeated safe interactions, the internal map can change. This specific human does not lead to harm. This person approaches slowly. This person does not chase me. This person's presence is sometimes followed by food, safety, or relief. That learned prediction is a scientifically useful way to understand trust. Trust does not necessarily require an animal to think in moral categories. It can emerge from repeated evidence. If something has consistently happened in the past, the animal's brain uses that information to predict what is likely to happen next. In this sense, trust is not necessarily a mysterious emotion. It can be a practical survival strategy. An animal in rehabilitation may learn to recognize a familiar caretaker's footsteps, voice, smell, movement, or behavioral pattern. The caretaker may eventually become a predictable part of the animal's environment. The animal knows what usually happens when that person approaches. Perhaps food appears. Perhaps an injury is treated. Perhaps the enclosure is cleaned. Perhaps nothing threatening happens at all. Over time, the animal's response can change. This does not mean it has adopted the human as a friend in the way a dog might bond with its owner. It means the animal has learned something important about that individual. Wild animals do not need to understand kindness as a moral concept in order to understand practical outcomes. They understand patterns. They understand consequences. They understand, at least in some form, who makes danger appear and who makes danger disappear. But there is another side to this story that is just as important. Sometimes the best evidence that an animal has been successfully helped is that it does not remain attached to the human at all. This sounds strange because humans naturally want a rescue story to end with a relationship. We want the animal to come back. We want it to recognize the rescuer. We want a moment of emotional connection that proves the rescue mattered. But for wildlife, that is often the wrong ending. The goal of rehabilitation is not to turn wild animals into pets or teach them to depend on humans. The goal is to return them to the wild where they can survive independently. Human familiarity can actually become dangerous. An animal that learns to approach people may eventually wander toward roads, homes, vehicles, or strangers who do not have good intentions. It may lose its natural fear of humans, making future encounters more dangerous for both the animal and the people involved. This creates a fascinating paradox. The more successful the rescue, the less visible the human relationship may become. A good rescuer may remove the trap, treat the injury, provide temporary care, and then disappear from the animal's life. The animal returns to forests, rivers, mountains, grasslands, or whatever environment it belongs to. Months later, it may never encounter that human again. And that is not a failure. It is the entire point. The best rescuer is often the person the animal eventually forgets, at least in any way that changes its wild behavior. The purest form of help may be to solve the problem and disappear. Still, the question of memory remains fascinating. Suppose an animal encounters the same person again years later. Would it recognize them? Some species clearly possess impressive memories. Others have much shorter or more specialized forms of memory. Recognition may also depend on what information the animal considers important. A face might matter to one species. A voice, smell, movement pattern, or location might matter more to another. Humans naturally prioritize faces because faces are central to our social world. But animals experience the world differently. A dog may recognize a person's scent long before the person comes into view. A bird may distinguish a familiar call. A mammal may remember the sound of footsteps. A wild animal's memory does not have to resemble our own to be effective. This also helps explain why an animal might behave differently toward the same person after a rescue without displaying anything that looks like gratitude. Imagine a fox trapped in a fence. A human approaches, cuts the wire, and leaves. Months later, the fox encounters that human again. Instead of immediately running, it pauses for a moment before moving away. That pause could mean many things. Perhaps it recognized the person. Perhaps the person's movement triggered a memory. Perhaps the location was familiar. Perhaps the fox simply judged that the person did not pose an immediate threat. We cannot know which explanation is correct from a single observation. But if the same animal repeatedly behaves differently toward that individual than toward unfamiliar humans, the possibility of recognition becomes much more interesting. The same principle applies to negative experiences. Animals can learn that humans are dangerous because humans have harmed them before. A bird that has been chased may become more cautious around people. A deer repeatedly disturbed by traffic or hunting may alter its movement patterns. An animal living near humans may become active at night because daytime brings too much danger. In these situations, the animal is not simply reacting to the present moment. Its behavior reflects accumulated information about the past. And if animals can remember harmful experiences strongly enough to alter their future behavior, it becomes reasonable to ask whether positive experiences can also become part of that memory. There is, however, an important limitation. We should not automatically assume that positive experiences have the same psychological effect as negative ones. Fear is an incredibly powerful survival mechanism. A single dangerous encounter can sometimes create a lasting avoidance response because remembering danger is useful. If you encounter a predator once and survive, forgetting the experience could be fatal. Positive experiences may work differently. An animal might not remember a rescue because the event was emotionally meaningful in the human sense. Instead, it might simply learn a practical association: this person did not attack me, this person removed something painful, or this location became safe again. That distinction keeps us grounded while still allowing us to appreciate the complexity of animal learning. It remains difficult to prove whether animals recognize the intention behind an action, but social species naturally pick up on subtle cues: slow movements, non-aggressive gestures, changes in posture, sounds, facial expressions, and repeated efforts to remove a threat all communicate information. An intelligent animal does not need to understand human language to process those signals. It may not think this creature is compassionate, but it can recognize that the creature is behaving differently from a predator. It can notice that the human is approaching without attacking. It can notice that the painful object is being manipulated rather than its body being harmed. It can notice that the human backs away afterward. These patterns may create an updated expectation. Kindness, therefore, may not require language. It may require only a recognizable pattern in which danger decreases when a particular creature approaches. That pattern could be enough to produce trust, but not every animal will learn it, and not every animal should. In wildlife rehabilitation, an animal that remains cautious around humans may actually have a better chance of surviving after release. A rescued animal that runs away from people betrayal is not necessarily rejecting the rescuer. In many cases, it is demonstrating exactly the wild behavior conservationists hope to preserve. A wild animal should be afraid of unfamiliar humans. That fear can keep it away from roads, houses, traps, hunters, and other dangers associated with human environments. This becomes especially important when considering the difference between domesticated animals and wildlife. Dogs, cats, horses, and other domesticated species have lived alongside humans for generations. Their behavior has been shaped by long periods of selective breeding and close association with people. A wild wolf, fox, deer, eagle, or bear exists under completely different evolutionary pressures. Its natural response to a human may be avoidance, caution, or defensive aggression. Expecting a wild animal to behave like a domestic animal simply because a human helped it is a mistake. The animal's wildness is not an obstacle to successful rescue. It is something worth protecting. Across ecosystems, wild animals are constantly collecting information about us through every interaction, whether from hunters, drivers, photographers, farmers, hikers, tourists, researchers, or rescuers. Their survival depends on learning which encounters are dangerous and which are not. Human beings are an unusual presence in the natural world because we can be both threats and sources of protection. The same species that destroys habitat can also restore it. The same human who might accidentally injure an animal with a vehicle can also stop to rescue one from a road. The same landscape that contains dangerous human activity may also contain people working to protect wildlife. From an animal's perspective, these contradictions create a complicated environment that must be navigated through experience. So when considering whether an animal knows it was saved, the answer is complex. It may not experience moral gratitude in the human sense. It may not construct a story about the rescuer. It may not understand the abstract idea that someone intentionally sacrificed their time to protect another living creature. But it can experience relief. It can experience the disappearance of pain. It can remember individuals. It can update its expectations. It can learn which humans are dangerous and which ones are not. It can recognize patterns, associate actions with consequences, and change future behavior because of what happened. Those abilities are already remarkable enough without forcing them into a human emotional framework. Perhaps there is something humbling about that uncertainty. Humans have spent centuries trying to understand animals, often assuming that the only meaningful intelligence is intelligence that looks like ours. We search for language, reasoning, morality, and emotion that resemble human versions of those things. But animals may experience the world through different systems entirely. A crow does not need to write a biography to remember a face. A dolphin does not need to speak our language to recognize that an interaction is different from an attack. A deer does not need to understand the word rescue to learn that one particular encounter ended with freedom rather than death. Their minds do not have to mirror ours to be sophisticated. The greatest mistake may be to swing too far in either direction. We should not treat animals as mindless machines that only react to stimuli, but we should also not turn every mysterious behavior into proof of human-like thoughts and emotions. The truth is more interesting than either extreme. Animals can remember, learn, recognize, predict, and adapt. They can respond to individuals differently based on previous experience. They can make decisions that reveal complex evaluations of their surroundings. Yet there are still enormous gaps in our understanding of what those experiences feel like from inside the animal's mind.